So after years of build-up, Durin will finally be coming to Genshin Impact, and safe to say that Durin is shaping up to be one of the most valuable characters in the game, being a top tier option on a wide variety of teams, as well as even just in my opinion improving a lot of characters. Hello there, Flip here, and today we're going to be talking all about Durin, breaking down his kit, giving a small build guide, and then compiling all the calculations I've done in one neat video. But before we do that, as always, if at any point during the video, get it, you are entertained or informed, make sure to drop a like and even consider subscribing, as I talk on various topics regarding Genshin's meta and to keep you updated. Shout out to my lovely channel members, your support means the world to me, I love you all. And also, so right now, Nephra and Lady Farina are currently on banner, so if you'd like to cut down on the costs while going for them, then I would like to announce the sponsor for today's video, LD Shop. LD Shop is a very safe and reliable top-up site that allows you to get Primo Gems at a great deal starting from 15% off, while keeping your data safe. As for transactions, you only need to type in your UID and region, as you can see me doing here. Just needed to quickly refresh my welkin, and as you can see, it's here. And make sure to use my link, as that way you'll receive an extra 15% off coupon, as well as a 5% off coupon which can save you up to $50. LD Shop goes through official channels as well, meaning that you won't lose any of the in-game benefits like first time top-up bonuses, so no need to worry. And additionally, because LD Shop is so great, users who spend over $80 will receive a VIP membership which rewards you with free welcome moons. So head over to ldshop.gg using my link in the description below. What are you waiting for? Thanks to LD Shop for sponsoring this video, now back to it. Now, one thing I really love about Cryo so far is that all the kits have been extremely simple, and Durin is no exception to this so far. Our dragon baby is a pyro sword wielder, and his kit revolves around just being a good off-field pyro damage dealer. Now, getting into his kit, as you would expect from this type of character, the normal attacks don't do anything. We can now get into what he actually does, starting with his elemental skill, which when cast will replace itself with a special version that gives Durin access to two states, a light state and a dark state. Durin's light state is activated by pressing the elemental skill, whilst his special elemental skill is active, and this is going to more so be the supportive version of Durin's kit. Whereas if you do a normal attack while Durin's in his special skill, this will cause Durin to enter his dark state that more so revolves around Durin's off-field personal damage. Even more, Durin generates 4 particles when his skill hits an opponent, and additionally just via using his skill, Durin will self-refund up to 33 flat energy, and this makes him have very low energy requirements even if he's the only pyro party member on the team, and gives room for some interesting weapon synergies. Now going back to Durin, he has 2 states, and therefore naturally you'd assume he has 2 different elemental bursts. To capitalize on this, both his light and dark bursts are kind of similar, with an initial hit of damage and then afterwards Durin does all-field damage. For the light state, his all-field damage will be within a 360-degree radius around him and attack every second, applying pyro every other second. And then his dark form, he'll start prepping single target projectiles that hit every 1.25 seconds and apply pyro every 2.5 seconds. In terms of pyro application, in his light form it's okay, it's on par with Malvika, which is fine, but not the fastest thing in the world. Then his dark form is kind of bad pyro application, it's slower than Malvika, on par with Dea, which isn't that stellar. Regardless, in both forms you can't really do things like enable Cryo very consistently without burning, so sorry Reverse Melt Risley fans, but if anyone was looking for a really fast pyro applicator, Durin just isn't that character. This is still going to be enough for someone like Mulaney though, regardless of form. There are still more differences between these two forms rather than just their hit and application rate, which for one, the dark form just has higher scalings on everything compared to the light form, and additionally looking at Durin's Ascension 1, when Durin uses his elemental burst, if he's in the light state, after teammates trigger a pyro-related reaction that doesn't melt or vaporize, the elements involved in the reaction are decreased by 20% for 6 seconds. This includes reducing Onamo, Dendra, and Geo resistance. The only resistances that can't be reduced are just Hydro and Cryo, but this is somewhat compensated for in Durin's dark mode, as that gives Durin himself a 40% reaction damage bonus to melt and vaporize damage. Basically, Hoyoverse just didn't want Durin to buff vapor melt teams where Durin isn't the main damage dealer of them from off-field, but funnily enough, Durin still somewhat buffs them, but we'll get into it. Durin's other passive just pretty much adds 1,000 flat bonus to all of his burst hits, which, sure, just a good damage boosting passive. And then you might want to brace yourself before listening to this, we can talk about something really interesting that Genshin is doing. To summarize, Genshin is now going to be doing faction buffs, where characters related to a specific group when there are at least 2 present will give buffs to said characters. The first faction buffs will be to witch characters, and the characters receiving buffs are Fischl my girl, Razor, Mona, Sucrose, Albedo, Klee, Venti, and of course Durin. I'll explain the other faction buffs when relevant, but for Durin specifically, his faction buff will make it so that when he's with another witch character, his Ascension 1 is enhanced by 75%, 35%, making him give a 35% resistance shred, and making his vape and melt reaction damage bonus 70%. TLDR, Durin is really good with witch characters and brings their value up when they're paired with them, and vice versa. Thankfully, most of the witch characters are limited characters or 4 stars, so you shouldn't have that much trouble in accessing this regardless. Now to quickly give a minor build guide for Durin, most of his damage is elemental burst damage. There's a sword you can get for free in the game right now called Moonweaver's Dawn that buffs burst damage. If you do not have a Wolffang from the battle pass, this weapon is going to be the one you want to use on Durin. For artifacts, if no one else on the team is using it and you're with attack scalers, 4-piece Noblesse is very good on Durin, as the 2-piece buffs his burst damage and the 4-piece gives him 20% attack, which he benefits from whilst buffing the team. But if someone else is using Noblesse or it's just not relevant for the team, 2-piece Noblesse, 2-piece Crimson, 4-piece Emblem, or Gilded in Team 3's vaping or melting a majority of his off-field damage is going to be your best bet. For main stats, Durin is running attack, pyro, crit pretty much always. In double pyro teams or more, he'll literally never need energy, but in solo pyro teams you'll need around 120, which is only like 4 rolls of VR and should be very obtainable, and that should cover the basics of what you need to know. We can now move on to my favorite part and compile all my calculations for Durin teams. So I am of course the Electro guy, so the first thing I want to talk about is going to be Electro teams and more specifically Chevreuse teams. And because I'm going to discuss these teams, Fischl will be there a lot. Fischl is a witch character, meaning that she gives white form Durin a stronger resistance shred, and additionally Fischl makes it so that when Oz is present and Fischl triggers an overload reaction, this will cause her to give the active character 22.5% attack. And if you have C6 Fischls, this is doubles to 45% attack to the active character and herself. So if you're wondering why Fischl is being used on these teams a lot, it's because of this, in addition to her already good traits without the buff like her personal damage and her battering properties. The character I was most excited to look at was Chlorinde, and Durin does indeed give her a niche strong team that's able to break 100k DPS and doesn't require you to use Malvika or anything, which is a contention a lot of people had with Chlorinde in these teams. Durin is purely being used as a sub DPS here, and if you look at the other calculation, Eonton's another character that can be used to great effect, replacing Fischl. It amounts to basically the same amount of DPS, but Fischl's a lot more comfortable to use, and Fischl C6 is more realistic than a C6 Eonton to most players, especially considering she can be picked up in the shop. Ironically enough though, Chlorinde can't actually take advantage of Eonton's C6 buff in this team, as she doesn't get enough movement without Malvika to actually overcap the buff for the C6 buff, so the only thing it really affects is the duration, which should cut off her burst from being buffed, but that isn't that big of a loss compared to losing the C6 from a Veressa team or something, as she doesn't take full advantage of it anyways. So this just makes Chlorinde less dependent on a high con Eonton to perform well. You're still gonna want that C6 Chevreuse though. Staying on topic, I did also look at Veressa teams, in which case it's the same story. Durin is just on par with Malvika as a sub DPS in these teams, and Fischl becomes a lot more competitive with Eonton in these teams, being on par with the lower constellation Eonton. I guess I should say here that Malvika does have stronger combos than what I may show in these videos. There's been a new Malvika technique that's been discovered where she can chain charge attack and dash cancels very quickly, which shoots both Chlorinde and Veressa up much higher than what Durin does. But for the calculations I'm showing in this video, I'm only doing standard play of Malvika doing a burst and charge attack, but just know that Malvika can indeed push out higher damage in these teams if you wanted to give her more field time and to learn her stronger combos. My friend Butterfur made an amazing video on this, so I would recommend checking out in the link in the description below. And also give him a like and tell him I sent you while you're there. But now, if we take a character that couldn't really use Malvika well in her Chevreuse teams, like Raiden, who doesn't buff Malvika's burst damage, and Malvika not giving Raiden resolve, then we get Raiden and Durin actually being a solid pair and putting Raiden over the 80k range in a team where she's actually being built as a crit carry, which is nice. Raiden just hasn't been getting burst damage dealers that she could buff for a while, so it's nice that Durin actually does something for her in these teams. The last Electro character I looked at was Razor, in which he's also a witch character and he got buffs. Razor's buffs for one made his wolf stronger by scaling with a portion of his attack. Razor is now always at 3 sigils essentially, as whenever he's supposed to obtain one he now gets 3, and he gets an additional attack when he is overcapped on sigils during his elemental burst, and this restores 7 energy to him too. So Razor now does a lot more Electro damage to the point where it's the focus of his teams, and his energy requirements are now even less existent, so yeah. And he also just gets 10 crit rate and 50 crit damage whenever you cast his burst at C6. All this to say that Razor just becomes a very competitive damage dealer bordering the 100k DPS range, which for a 4-star primarily using other 4-star teammates is pretty insane to think about. So yes, there's a pretty huge Razor revival and I'm here for it. I think that's enough for the Electro DPS though. Let's move in with the Pyro damage dealers, in which very commonly with Pyro DPS, it trends out the best team for them extends to every other Pyro DPS, making calculating all of them kind of useless. So I just looked at Linny as he's pretty simple to calculate and he doesn't get enough love, in which case this just becomes Linny's strongest team right now. So by extension it should be Arlecchino's best team at C0, Klee's best team, who's another character who also got buffs, Yoimiya's best team and Deia's best team most likely. The only people who this shouldn't be best for are the plunge DPS like Gaming or Diluc, as well as the Pyro DPS with low scalings made up by reacted hits like Hu Tao or Yanfei. So Durin should be a noticeable buff to most of the Pyro roster via Chevrolet's teams. And I did also want to look at mono Pyro teams to see if they're good now with the addition of a new Pyro sub DPS. And also Albedo gets witch buffs, which essentially doubles his talent scaling, as well as giving team-wide damage bonus buffs, making him both a better sub DPS and support. And technically this is now the best way to play mono Pyro teams, but it's still just weaker than using Chevrolet's or other strong team cores. Albedo C1 is also free, which additionally now buffs his defense by 50%, making his sub DPS and buffing stronger, which does help in bridging the gap between mono Pyro and other teams. So yeah. Speaking of Albedo, we can now actually look at Navia, in which the Durin Albedo core is now the best way to play her teams too, where she's actually on field for a majority of her rotation time. It's kind of hilarious how Albedo was power crept by Chiori, and now he's back with a vengeance to re-power creep himself and Chiori. Once again, Movica can technically be higher if you use her combos and give Navia less field time, only using her skills, so it really depends on what you value. But if you want Navia to be on field for a long time, then here's your team. She does lose out on some buffing from Shilonen, making her personal damage worse than in Movica teams and in Frina teams, so if you do have a high constellation Navia, it may not be worth it to do this, but if your Navia C0 and doesn't have much vertical, this should be her best team. I didn't look at Ito personally, but I would also just assume, considering the fact that Geo supports aren't really that great, unless you have what is C2 Shilonen, that Ito, Gore, Albedo, Durin should be his best team too, and unlike other teams like Double Hydra or Plunge that has to compromise his main playstyle, this should keep most of Ito's identity. For someone in a similar boat to Geo supports who are also just floating around a lot of different team cores, Durin should also be a side grade to Wanderer's best teams right now like Enefa or Farina, but not really moving the needle enough to where I can say it's his best use case, which is kind of unfortunate. Someone that did actually surprise me is Kinich, where Durin as a deep wood holder is very competitive with Malvika, if not better than her, if you're using Eon-san. Durin and Kinich do have some slight anti-synergy, which is annoying, as Durin's resistant shred is procced when a reaction is triggered and lasts 6 seconds, but with burning, once you have the aura on an enemy, it can't be re-triggered, and therefore the res shred will run out from your second rotation onwards unless a new enemy spawns in. This is somewhat alleviated with Eon-san, as she can cleanse the burning aura, allowing for it to be re-triggered, giving you some uptime on the resistance shred, but this just can't be done on a pure burning team. I really wish they'd do something with this issue burning has, as it also makes a weapon like Earthshaker really bad, and makes it so that Movica can't use scroll in Kinich teams, but whatever, Durin side grades Movica really nicely for Kinich, and with Eon-san should be his best general pyro applicator. However, theoretically in things like Stygian Onslaught or single target encounters, you're better off just using Ben as your sole pyro applicator and running Eon-san alongside Emily, if you can. As long as you are reapplying Dendro constantly, even one instance of pyro application can sustain burning indefinitely, which makes double stacking buffers the ideal thing to do. Now this was just Durin's white form teams. His dark form kind of sucks, and is used in cases where you're playing Durin with primarily Hydro and Cryo characters, or just trying to capitalize off of Durin's off-field vaped or melted damage. This made me look at Nouvelette teams where Durin is having his vapes enabled by Nouvelette, and it just wasn't that great in comparison to Nouvelette's other teams, and especially with the other teams you can build for Durin that I've listed here that are actually pretty good or upgrades. I just don't think it's worth to play them together. Zajeff apparently cooked up some Vaporize, Burgeon, something team. I don't know. I haven't looked into myself because there's not really accurate reaction counts right now, but when I do, I'll let you know if it's good. Someone like Risley should also allow Durin to melt most of his kit via doing N3Cs, but I haven't calculated it, and I don't think it's what most Ryo mains want, but melting Durin's off-field hits should be very strong. So another team for Risley. Durin is shaping up to actually be a Mualani upgrade, which is interesting. I've seen Double Geo Mualani supposedly be her best team, but I haven't verified that. But even some of the other teams I've seen calculated with Durin and that I have calculated look very good, and allows Mualani to cross 100k DPS very comfortably with multiple different setups. So yeah, even though Durin's black form is kind of useless, it does have some nice use cases. Now with all of this in mind, is Durin a good character? Yes. Obviously, he's a good character. He's able to support a wide variety of teams across the entire element spectrum, and the sheer fact that he's able to side grade or even upgrade Movica slightly in a lot of different use cases, where Movica is one of the most overpowering sub DPSs we have, is very strong. There's been so many people complaining that using Movica as a sub DPS is a waste, because Movica is better as a main damage dealer, and thankfully we need to have no more of that discourse, because Durin, again, is just a side grade to Movica, while lifting up other very underutilized characters like Albedo Vado. And I do think Durin also has a lot more long-time value as a sub DPS than Malvika, because one thing Malvika does in her teams where she's being used as a sub DPS is that you have to set up like all your supports, then buff Malvika's burst, and then switch to your main DPS, where Durin is just competing with her damage while not really receiving that many buffs, and also not having to take any additional field time to do charge attacks or something. It's kind of underwhelming that Durin doesn't buff that much, or isn't that much better than Malvika theoretically, even doing her weaker combos, and I understand that sentiment, but at the same time, you again have a more accessible sub DPS Malvika, while not hindering another Malvika team. And for Stygian where you need 3 strong teams, this is really good to me, because it means you can run a Malvika team on one side, a Durin team on the other side, and then I guess a Nordcry team for your third team, until a lot of Natlan DPS were kind of nerfed via only having one Malvika if you wanted to use 2 of them at the same time, which is no longer really the case if you decide to get both. So even if you do have Malvika, I still think there's value in pulling for Durin, and if you don't have Malvika, then that's even more reason to get Durin, just because he works in so many different teams. Alas, I think that's all I want to say. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts on Durin, as I'd love to hear and respond to almost every single comment. Channel members, thank you all so much for your continued support. It means the world to me. Hugs and kisses to you all. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys on the flip side.